So this video is going to go over how to write your journal for the review journal, and along with the workbook that can be found in Canvas. So the review journal asks you to choose a lesson, activity, discussion, debate, multimedia resource, or slide deck that you can find either on Canvas, or if you're in a face-to-face class during the face-to-face sessions, or if you're in the online courses. This would also include any other videos or other things that are brought into the module. All of these resources can be found under the required studies section, and you're going to choose one of these to review and to explain what you learned from it, and then how others might use it in the class as well. All right, so before you even begin anything, you want to choose your lesson or activity, or if it's the multimedia resource. And then you're going to decide the kind of note taking you're going to do while you're going through the process of either reflecting over it, or if you're in the middle of it and you're kind of living that experience. Okay, so there are lots of note taking methods out there, but there are four major ones that I think are really effective, depending on your preferences and the way you kind of like learn material. So I'm going to go over these four just very briefly. This is really still a pre-step, right? This is before you've even kind of engaged or even thought about writing what you're going to do for your journal. So the first of these is known as the Cornell method. It goes by lots of different names. It's had different stages. So there's usually five, and usually those five are record, question, reduce, recite, or review. Sometimes you'll see other steps mentioned. Sometimes people will try to make it like the 5 R's. But basically, the Cornell method is this: is that while you're engaged in an activity, say it's a lecture, a discussion, or you're viewing a video, you record what you hear as best you can. So just try to take as many facts, kind of based notes as you can. And you do that in one maybe side of the page, or maybe on a separate notebook paper, whatever it is that works best for you. Then on another piece of paper or on another side of the page, you write down questions as things come up, right? So as you're learning and you come across something that you don't know or that you wonder about, you jot that down. When you're done, you go back and you try to reduce the information to its basic components, right? So you kind of look back over your notes and you realize, okay, this is information, although it was nice to know, it probably isn't the most vital, so we could probably erase that. Or there's another way to say this or another way to summarize it. Then once you've got like a real bare bones kind of list of things, you recite them, right? So you say these things out loud. There's some research that I can certainly quote in the video that demonstrates that, when we recite things, we tend to help record that information in our brains. And then the last and probably most important is to go back and review this material at a later date. So not to cram, not to do it all in one night or all in one sitting, but to give yourself some time and to forget, and then come back and kind of review. And I know it seems kind of counterintuitive, but it turns out that in the process of forgetting information, we actually are sort of removing information that's not as important, and it actually makes the most important main ideas more bold in our minds. And again, a lot of great research on that as well. All right, so that's the Cornell method. It's sort of also the traditional method of taking notes, where you just kind of sit down and take notes as someone is speaking. All right. Now, a less conventional, or maybe even the opposite way of taking notes, would be mapping. And this is actually the technique that I use most often in my face-to-face courses, where when students are sharing ideas or I am kind of charting ideas, I start with a big main idea and I branch that off as we're talking, and kind of highlight main ideas and supporting ideas that go with that. It's a nice way to kind of visually see how information connects. The downside to it, though, is that it can get kind of chaotic, right? So unless you really think in this kind of interactive and mapped way, sometimes it can be a struggle to kind of organize these things. And it takes some practice. I've been doing it for a long time, so I tend to kind of know how to organize things, and that's one way to do it. All right. The next way is charting. Charting is sort of a middle ground between the Cornell method and mapping. What you do is you kind of divide your notebook paper into 2 or 3 columns. And then in those columns, you're going to jot down like main idea, supporting idea, and questions, or something along those lines, so that the headings are really tailored to your personal needs. And then what you do is you kind of outline what you're doing. You kind of jot down information as you go, but then make connections between the columns. So sort of drawing lines, arrows between the different columns, or using one column for main topics, one column for subtopics, one column for main questions or key ideas or key terms. Then the last type of note-taking I'm going to go over is outlining. This is also a rather traditional one. You use kind of like Roman numerals for the major topics, capital letters for key information that you have to know, like people, places, dates, activities, that kind of thing, events. And then underneath that, you use numbers and lowercase letters to help define what's above it, right? This is actually, it's a really powerful method, especially when you go back to try to write up something. However, it's very difficult to do in the moment. And so oftentimes people use the outlining after the fact. So they might use a charting method or a Cornell method or a mapping method, and then organize it later in an outlining method. I've seen people use it in the review and the reduced stages of the Cornell method. I've seen people use it to help try to organize kind of like the randomness of either the charting or the mapping method. But whatever method works best for you, you should take notes on the information, right? So if it's a lecture in class or a video lecture, you should take notes. But also if it's a discussion or an activity or a slideshow or a slide deck, all those resources really should be kind of reflected upon and recorded in your own voice in your own way so that the information is most meaningful to you. Now, one last thing of caution is for this journal, you may not use your textbook. So there's another journal assignment called the analysis journal, which you do use your textbook. This journal, the review journal, you do not use your textbook. You are reviewing a lesson or a multimedia resource that goes along with the textbook, but is not your textbook. Okay, so just to reiterate that, and that you're doing this from things that are not including your textbook. If you do use your textbook for this, it won't count. Okay, so it won't be graded. Okay, so once you've got a good set of solid notes, you're going to then take those notes and you're going to use them to use what's known as the teach back process. Another way to say it is teaching from learning. And so there's some really great educational theory out there. And again, I'll cite this in the video that says that, one of the best ways to learn something is through the process of trying to teach it. And it sounds counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, if I don't know it, how do I teach it? And that's precisely what's going on, right? What the teaching by learning process says is that you are first trying to get the information really solidified in your mind so that you feel confident so that you can share that information. But then it also forces you to break down that information in ways that other people can understand it. And this is a very reinforcing kind of process, right? Because you look at it and you try to break it down into its pieces, and really kind of dissecting and deliberating, and that really solidifies that information deep inside your core memory, right? So another way to think of this, though, is to really think about it is that it's an act of empathy, right? Teaching is really this idea that you try to embrace how other people might view the information, put yourself in their shoes, and then try to explain it to them so they understand. And it's very different to just explain something so you understand, but trying to explain it so that other folks know what you're trying to say. Oftentimes, especially in like the humanities, where a lot of our material is very subjective and open-ended, that also asks us to kind of question what's right and what's correct versus what's wrong and what's incorrect, right? Certainly there's information that kind of falls into the more objective nature. This is this object and it was made at this time by these people or by this artist, right? Those are objective, right? But then when it comes to what does it mean or what's its purpose, what's its use in the world, those become more subjective, right? And then when we start looking at things like values, like what is, the meaning of life and why are we here? And, what's right and wrong and how do we know? And what information really is the information that is most important? How do we live? And these kinds of things that humanities dives into become very open-ended, right? And so knowing that when you're talking about a topic that you might end up seeing folks from very different walks of life forces you to think about, okay, so then what do I do? How do I approach it? What material is important? What information should I share with them? And right, it really forces you to think about others, not how you learn it. Okay, so how does this process look? The first kind of thing you're going to do is you're going to take on the role of the teacher, right? You're going to pretend you're a teacher, and then you're going to explain your understanding of the topics and concepts. You're going to explain it in your own words. You're going to try to make it in words that make sense to lots of different folks, and you're going to try to kind of break things down in ways that other people might manage the information. Then you're going to demonstrate your mastery by investigating, what is most important, but why is it important, right? Asking yourself that why. In class, I like to play this game called the 5 Whys, and in it, you simply state something and then ask why. And then you take that answer and you ask why again. And then you take that answer and you ask why again. And really, what you're trying to do is drill down into the deeper reasonings behind things, right? So just because you have a matter of fact, surface level answer isn't usually satisfying. And so you have to go to the next level. So why was that answer correct? Or why was that answer shared? Okay, well, now you've got a new answer and you got to dig deeper into there. Okay. And finally, your whole point or your whole goal is to take this information that you've gained from a multimedia resource or from a lesson or for something in class, from a video. And what you're doing is you're trying to connect that to your prior knowledge and your prior experience, right? And so you're really trying to, develop a more interactive and a more connected way of understanding the content. So another way to kind of look at it, I've got this like little flow chart over here to help kind of help guide your thinking as you think about being a teacher. And the first is, make the material matter. So, the most important thing that you can do as a teacher is try to make the material meaningful for the audience. Audiences know when someone's being inauthentic. Audiences know when the information is kind of boring or bland and the person presenting it isn't really invested. So you got to make it very authentic. So choose something that you enjoy, but also choose something that, has some substance to it, that is meaningful, and that you can really investigate. Then you want to be clear in what you want to say, okay? It's not just how you say something, it's not just what you say, but it's also why you chose what you chose to emphasize. You want to be very clear and deliberate in that. And you want to try to avoid the rambling, right? And that shows up in either, when someone's speaking about something, but also when they write about something, right? You can see the rambling thoughts in writing, and it's often because the person wasn't clear in what they wanted to communicate. And so be very deliberate in the words you choose, the context you choose, the organization you choose. Make sure that those are choices and not just kind of like stream of consciousness kinds of things. Okay. Reinforce ideas without being redundant. This is really important. It's easy to just restate something over and over again and hope that people will remember it. But truthfully, the way we remember things is that when it's reinforced in different ways. I'm often reminded of the myth of the learning style. It's perhaps the saddest thing that's come out of educational theory. This idea that folks learn a specific way and then they only learn that way. And that's actually not true. It turns out that we learn in lots of different ways. And that, sometimes we learn, use a different method of learning because of the situation, right? So, for instance, I'm the kind of person that I like to read things. I like to listen to folks give lectures and speak and answer questions. But that would be terrible if I was doing something like working on an engine or trying to do a recipe and follow along, right? Those are terrible ways for me to know those things. And that's because situationally, I like different things. Turns out that's true for everybody. So when people are like, oh, I'm a hands-on learner or I'm an audio learner, that may be true for specific situations. And it turns out you probably just like those situations, not necessarily like all materials should be presented in that way. What this brings us kind of back to that point of reinforcing ideas is think about different ways you can say something or different opportunities you can communicate something or different ways you can engage something so that it hits different people in different moments in different situations so that they are receptive to it. Because that leads us to our last point, which is keeping your audience engaged. Now, for this assignment and for our intents and purposes for this course, I'm your audience, right? As a teacher, I'm your audience. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the role of the student. I've been a student for many, many years and throughout my whole life, right? So I can take this role. And what I'm going to be looking for is, can you communicate to me your mastery, your interest, your excitement about the topic and get me engaged, right? And that will come through with a lot of energy, but also a lot of diligence and deliberateness in the way you present the material. So to help organize this, we're going to use a graphic organizer. Okay, so this is the step-by-step kind of way of doing it, and I've got some questions up at the top, and I've kind of outlined that way. You will fill in this graphic organizer, and you will share this then with me with your assignment. We're a humanities course. A lot of what we do is visual, and so we're trying to communicate not just through the written language, but also through visual language, and see how ideas connect. And you could see this is sort of like a note-taking kind of format, right? It's kind of a blend of the different note-taking methods that I shared earlier in the video. So there are 4 major areas I want you to focus on when you're filling on the graphic organizer, but then also when you go to create your written version of this, written journal, okay? And the first area is the big idea. So you want to really capture what the big idea was from the lesson, the lecture, the discussion, the slide deck, the video, whatever you're choosing. You want to really focus on what are the core concepts or the principles, theories, or processes that serve as the focal point, right? So you really want to focus on that, okay? So really think about, what's being communicated throughout, all right? Then the next thing is you're going to, summarize it with a synopsis. So give supporting ideas and details concerning the lesson, and then explain the overall purpose or goal, right? So, you can look at it and see, okay, this is why he did what he did. This is why he's trying to build towards this, right? Try to decode that information by looking at it, but by giving what happened. Give a synopsis, right? Step by step, what took place. The lecture went this direction. Here are the main themes. The video went this direction. Here are the main kind of sections of the video, right? So that's what you really want to focus on, right? When you're giving your synopsis of what happened, what took place. Set the scene, set the tone, right? If this is a face-to-face class, describe where we're at, describe who's in the classroom. If this is an online class, describe your learning environment, describe like how you were, where you were mentally at the moment, and then, kind of go through step by step what happened. Write that kind of recipe of the lesson. Then the next section is the links. So describe historical or social relationships, relate to the previous material, and use the material in the future. Okay, so this is often a challenge for a lot of students, because what you're going to be doing here is every lesson, every activity, every slide deck, every video is embedded in the course to build on the previous information that was already shared, but also to allow for new information to be built upon it, right? I literally design my classes with a thesis statement in mind, and then every single thing we do is supporting evidence for that thesis statement. And then at the end of the course, we write a conclusion, trying to summarize and understand kind of the final moments of the class. So take a look at this lesson and then decide, okay, how does this fit into history and our social dynamics? Or how does this fit into the previous lessons that you've already learned in this class or in other classes that are related to this class? And then how might you use the material in the future? What might this be a building block for in the kind of the road ahead? Then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to do prior knowledge. So you're going to explain your prior knowledge on the topics and your personal connections and commentaries. And here you should raise a lot of questions, right? So basically what you're doing is, okay, you've learned this new material. What did you already know? What didn't you already know? And how do the two connect, right? And when you raise questions, that's questions for things that you don't know but want to learn more about. And when you make commentaries, it's commentaries based on your prior experience, but now some new experience should take place. I always say this in my lectures that learning is a process of change. If you did not change in some way, then you didn't learn. We all change a little bit when we learn something new. I've been studying this material for my entire adult life, so 20 some years. Every time a student presents something, I look for something new that I didn't see before so that I can learn something new and change my perspective on it. And I ask you to do the same thing. Okay, so you'll see that the way the graphic organizers outline is that you kind of answer in these little boxes, these bullet points. And that's like your first kind of like basic notes that you've taken. Then from there, you want to develop those basic notes and those basic ideas with some supporting evidence, right? Supporting evidence cited from the actual lesson or from the video, supporting evidence from what we've learned in the class, et cetera, et cetera. Then you'll see at the bottom, it kind of filters everything into two halves. The big idea and the synopsis go on this half, and the links and the prior knowledge go on this half. And what you're really doing now is trying to blend all that together. So blend the big idea with the synopsis and kind of write a conclusion or summary of that, and then blend the links and the prior knowledge, and again, write kind of a summary or a conclusion from there. You'll see I provided a more a blank one where it doesn't have all the questions up at the top, but it does give you sort of the same kind of way to fill it in. Now, I provide this as a packet in Canvas that you can download and then print and then hand fill in. And then you can just take a picture of what you've written by hand and upload that picture. If you want to, you're free to recreate this in a PowerPoint slide or a Word doc or something like that. I don't create a fillable one that you can just kind of take and download online. I just create kind of like the shape of it, but how you want to create it is totally up to you. The only thing I request is that you make it a graphic organizer, that it's visual. So it looks like this. It's not just lists on a piece of paper, but it has sort of boxes and arrows connecting ideas and really organizes information in a graphic way and not just kind of, an outline way. This serves as your kind of pre-writing for when you actually finish up the actual journal, okay? You do submit this. I check this. Like I said before, this is a humanities course, so we use a lot of visual ways of communicating. This is one way to visually communicate ideas. It's not in full sentence form. It's just bullet points, phrases, and then I want to see your thinking and how you drill down information, right? So how do you take big ideas and synopsises and how do you drill that down to something manageable? How do you take something that's kind of abstract, like how we link things and your personal experiences, which I obviously don't know without you sharing them to me, and how do you drill that down into something that's manageable for you to understand, right? So that's the purpose of the graphic organizer. It's why you have to include it along with your written entry. Okay, so make sure you either recreate this or just print this out. It's black and white on purpose, and then you can fill it in and take a picture of it. Okay, once you've finished your graphic organizer, got your notes, you've got your graphic organizer, you've got all your pre-writing done, you're now ready to write your journal. And I recommend doing this in a Google Doc or a Word doc, something that you can save. And the reason is, if you run into any technical difficulties, then you can always go back and be like, oh, I've got it so I can resubmit, right? But if you don't have that, and maybe you're typing straight into Canvas, and all of a sudden it crashes, there's no way for me to recover from that. I don't know how to. There's no way for me to recover that. I can't. I can't just go in and be like, oh, where were they? It doesn't work like that. I've tried a million times with Canvas, but there's just no support for that. So what you really have to do is you have to have it saved in a separate location, and that way you can always go back to it if you need to. While you're writing, I highly recommend availing yourself of these two resources over here on the right. The first of these is Purdue OWL. Purdue OWL is a really great resource on how to write an expository essay, on how to work on your grammar, on how to work on collegiate writing and develop a thesis statement. All of these things are my expectations for you, that you know how to do, that you can write a thesis statement, that you know how to write at college level writing, that you can check for grammar and flow and your organization structure of your paper. And if you don't know those things or you need to brush up on those things, I highly recommend looking at Purdue OWL. Great resources, a very easy URL, right? It's just owl.purdue.edu. And it's really designed for undergrad students who really need kind of help, just kind of focusing on that writing skills and those writing conventions that are required for academic writing, okay? Likewise, Waubonsie also offers some resources that you should avail yourself of. And the first of those is the Zoom online chat and drop-in. There's also a way to schedule sessions with the tutors, either virtually or face-to-face. And then there's some other 24/7 online tutoring with Smart Thinking, which is kind of an AI software that we have. So all those are great resources that Waubonsie offers. And again, I highly recommend you avail yourself of them, because a mistake often students make is that when they write something and they sit down and write it, they think they've written their essay. And really what they have only done is done a rough draft. We have to read these drafts out loud to hear flow, to hear issues with grammar. We usually have to have a second pair of eyes to help us understand the mistakes we made along the way. And so I highly recommend utilizing these resources, because you are going to be evaluated on your writing skills as if you did use these resources. So not doing so could negatively impact your grade. All right, once you've written your thing in your Word doc or your Google Doc, there's a few steps you have to follow in order to submit. And you do have to follow these exactly, otherwise your essay won't count. So the first of these is you want to copy and paste the text into the submission box right here. Okay, so this is a screenshot of what Canvas looks like, and it says copy and paste your submission right here. It's very easy, just copy and paste it in there. Now, because you're copying and pasting, you're going to lose some formatting. That's okay. I don't check for formatting. I don't grade for formatting. I do check for plagiarism. I do check for citations inside the body of the written journal, as well as footnoted citations or works cited citations. I strongly recommend that you don't use quotes, because I don't count those towards the word count, and they often get picked up by the plagiarizer checker. If you made a mistake in the quoting or you made an error, then it ends up becoming flagged as plagiarized. With that said, that is the reason why I ask you to copy and paste in here. You cannot upload a Word doc or a PDF. The plagiarizer checker just won't check it thoroughly enough, and so I won't grade those. You must submit the text in this submission box. Now, what's complicated is you can copy and paste the text, but you cannot copy and paste any images. And I do ask that you supply images with your journal. As we've said before, humanities course do a lot of visual things. Bare minimum, you have to submit your graphic organizer, but the other images that you're asked to submit, they also have to be done in a similar way. And the way you do that is you click on this mountain icon. So it looks like two little mountains with the sun up on the top. And you click on that and you'll see it says upload image. That means you have to have the image. So that means the graphic organizer or any other images that you have to be saved to your desktop or in your photos or in your picture file folder or whatever you have them, but they have to be accessible that you can upload them. You cannot copy and paste images of the Canvas. If you do so, it turns them into a link. Likewise, if you upload the image, you must click on embed image please do not click on display as link. If you display it as a link or you copy and paste it as a link, I won't click on it because two things. One, that takes me out of Canvas. So I have to go outside of Canvas, look at this picture, and oftentimes that causes trouble, right? It can cause things to crash. It can cause me to lose my place when I was grading, et cetera, et cetera. But the other reason, and the more important reason, is most of the time those links also ask me to download the image, and I refuse to download things. I've gotten too many viruses that way, and so I refuse to download student work. You do have to submit it as embedded in the actual assignment. Okay. If you fail to embed your graphic organizer or any other images that you have to put in there, you will lose points for that. And sometimes I won't grade it depending on how much you haven't done. Okay. So you want to make sure that you put those images as embedded inside the actual submission and not as links or copies. Okay. The last thing before you submit, you want to check your word count. I do check for word count. You have to hit the minimum. If you do not hit the minimum word count, you cannot earn a C on the assignment, which is the passing grade for humanities courses. So you must double check your word count. Word counts unto themselves are not the most important thing. However, what word counts do is they tell you how much substantive material you have to provide. And it's not just fluff, it has to be quality material. I'm asking you to do some pretty rigorous analysis and reviews in journals, and I expect a lot of well thought out and well constructed writing. Sometimes students will say to me, but Aaron, I can really summarize this in a shorter way and I can be very brief. My response is that's great, but hear me out. I'm expecting you to be able to do that. I'm expecting you to be able to be brief and summarize things. And with that said, I don't know how you can summarize all of the content and all of the information that I'm requesting in anything less than a minimum word count. And so that's why the word count is important. Okay, so make sure you hit that minimum word count. You have everything in here now. You've got text copied over. You've embedded your images. You've not linked them or copied them. You've embedded them, and you are ready to go. Then you just go head down here and you hit that submit assignment button, and then it goes to me. All right. At this point, that's the end of how you write your journal review. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to address them. Thank you and good luck.